Good afternoon. Here we go. All right, good to see everybody this afternoon. We're going to open with an invocation and then we'll get started. Dear Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to serve you and to serve the people of our communities in this state. We pray that you'd bless us with your wisdom as we make decisions important to those around us. In Christ's name I pray. Amen. I thought she was praying with me down there a minute. I grew up in Pentecostal church. It's not unusual to hear people do that while you're praying. So, bless her, Lord. Oh, man. Well, that's a good start, I suppose. We are not going to be discussing the truck weights bill this afternoon. So you may exit at this time. We're not going to discuss the truck weights bill this afternoon. Representative Nimmer and the subcommittee are still working on that issue, so we're not quite ready for that issue today. So I apologize for the inconvenience of those who've come for that particular bill. But we are going to talk about the governor's statutory 10-year strategic transportation plan that was required to be given by the executive in House Bill 170. And we're going to hear today from the Commissioner McMurray from the Department of Transportation, and he has with him today the State Planning Director, Mr. Jay Roberts. And I would go on the record as saying that Mr. Roberts' confirmation to his post was conducted before I was the chairman of this committee, and so I may have some questions for him while we're here today. I don't know if he got a thorough and proper grilling, but we'll see. But with that, I would ask Commissioner McMurray to come on around, and Mr. Roberts, please come around and talk to us about the governor's strategic, or the 10-year strategic transportation plan. And
all right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the Transportation Committee. Our goal today is to go over the statutory 10-year strategic transportation plan, and I give you that it is an annual 10-year strategic plan. So you get this every year going forward. So hopefully we got good strategy. But before we dig in, you should have two handouts. You have one big sheet with a table on it, and then you have a handout. So we're going to go over those sort of in parallel just to sort of walk through what this is, since this is the first year this has come before you. But before I start, I want to respond to an article that was incorrectly, had some things factually wrong that came out earlier, I guess late last week, ran over the weekend, that emphasized that 84% of the transportation investment was being spent in Metro Atlanta, and that's factually wrong. So I've spread a letter to the editor. Hopefully that will be throughout the paper. You get run to try to correct that, and I think what you'll see today through this conversation, through the press conference that was held a few weeks ago now, those levels of investment of transportation are throughout all of Georgia. Okay, so there's a strategic plan. You'll see part of that where this is. That article referenced the really 11 major mobility projects that would be underway over the next 10 years and did the math, and when you looked at that math, it was 84% for just those 11 projects, not what the strategic spend is across the state. So just want to start with that because I know that's caused some angst and some anxiety, and I want to get that straight. So those 11 projects are on top of the annual investment that was presented in those bar charts of capital, of replacing bridges and capital maintenance and taking care of our system. So just wanted to say that before we get going. So let's jump in. The first thing, if you flip to your handout, flip over to the second slide there. And it's basically what's summarized on the big sheet. It's what is this annual 10-year strategic plan about? And it takes your review and approval and recommendations to the Appropriations Committee. So that's the goal, is for you to review and approve and move this to the Appropriations Committee. And what the annual 10-year strategic plan does is set targets and resources. Targets meaning percentages in the categories of construction of new highway projects, maintenance of existing infrastructure, bridge repairs and rehabilitation, safety enhancement, and administrative expenses. So those 5 categories are where the percentage of resources and sources of funds have to be identified. So what I'd like to do is walk through those 5 categories and sort of tell you how this comes about. And the code language is on top of the big sheet that basically spells out all the things that have to be done. And again, that code language, if you flip over to the next page on the handout, you'll see that investment priority shall be given to maintenance and expansion of improvements of highway infrastructure where two conditions exist, whereas traffic is most impacted, where traffic congestion is most impacted, basically, in areas in the state where need of highway infrastructure is to aid in attracting economic development. So you look at infrastructure, taking care of your infrastructure first and through maintenance, and then expansion and improvement of highway infrastructure in those two conditions, in areas of congestion, in areas of the state where economic development is needed, where the highway infrastructure is needed to promote economic development. So that's sort of the goal, sort of the charge. If you flip over to the next page, give you a little bit of background of complexity of how the strategic nature of this comes into play. And we start talking about strategic planning, there's a number of planning documents and plans that are in place that basically support the back end of this, of how you get to these percentages. You start with a statewide strategic transportation plan. You move into the statewide transportation improvement program, which probably most of you are familiar with. That's what we call the STIP. And that's where annually we go out and meet with the local governments, the city, counties in the non-urban areas, and talk about the projects, line up the projects, get priorities from the local governments. That comes back in. We assemble that. Our state transportation board goes and approves that. It moves to the governor for his approval. So that STIP document, I didn't bring it, but it's like yay thick, and that's all the projects across the state in non-metro areas to move forward. So this 10-year strategic plan has those STIP projects added in there. That's one of the things that was absent in the article and really was not elaborated on when we did the press conference, because those are your base projects, the ones that exist already. So the press conference and the article sort of talked about everything on top of that. So let's not forget, foundationally, there's a state transportation improvement program in place that's already approved. That moves you next to the MPOs. So all our metropolitan planning organizations across the state, they get to pick and choose the projects in those metropolitan boundaries. So that's incorporated into the state strategic plan. Georgia was one of the first in the nation, I'm proud to say, to have the statewide freight and logistics plan. So that looks at freight movement across this state as what with the wonderful assets we have with our ports, and both on the coast and our inland ports now. So that we have that plan in place. So strategically we took projects and understood projects from there into this plan. And again, as you go down the list, we use the managed lane implementation plan or program, which is those express lanes that we've talked about. That's been in place now for a number of years. And always city or county planning processes. So cities and counties do their own planning processes, of which those projects get incorporated into our program as well. And then sort of finally, the last two things that probably should be the first two things on this list is really an asset-based approach to pavements and bridges. We do condition surveys every 2 years on our pavements and our bridges to see what kind of shape they are. That we go through a strategic and complicated rating process. So those projects come to the top based on the conditions of the assets themselves. And some of that is federally required. Some of it is just how we manage to try to take care of the state's assets in a dutiful manner. And last, probably should be first, is strategic highway safety plan. Again, focusing on safety of the roadways, safety of the hardware, safety of the roadsides, and that's where sort of all the projects come from. If you flip over next, that's sort of the sources, if you will, of where the strategic plan was developed from. So now let's move to the resources, to dollars. Okay, so taking what was required in the law, we started with the federal piece, this resource that says Federal FAST Act fiscal year 17. So luckily the feds approved the federal 5-year transportation bill right before Christmas, which was really important. And you can see that Georgia's apportionment level is $1.3 billion, of which you never quite get what they promise. You get less than that, which is called a obligation authority. So we get $1.24 billion of federal dollars. There's about it averages out to be about a 20% match, so we have to put $248 million to match the federal dollars. And so that sort of gives you the starting point. And we started with the FAST Act, which is 5 years, so we know what those dollars are over 5 years. After that 5 years, we grew that number at 1% for the balance of the last 5 years. And so that sort of gives you an idea of what your resources are. The next complication to the federal program is you can see that there's several categories or buckets, if you will, where those dollars are used. So when you think about this 10-year strategic plan and you think about federal money, it's not in one bucket. It's in 6 buckets. And one of those buckets has, I believe, 5 to 7 subcategories. So you have to marry up the fund sources to the federal buckets on the federal side. Some of those sub-buckets are obviously the MPO areas have allocations to them. There's allocations from 5,000 to 200,000 populations. There's allocation of federal dollars for less than 5,000. There's allocation for rec trails. There's allocation to the enhancement projects. So there's a lot of subcategories. So we just be mindful that there's not one big bucket of federal money and one big bucket of state money, and you're trying to, pull everything out of one bucket. There's multiple buckets with quite a bit of complexity. So the next page gets you over to the state resources of state funds. These numbers marry up to what was in the amended fiscal year 16 budget in the fiscal year 2017 governor's recommendation, and so that gives you the dollars. We use the state economist's last forecast that goes out through 2020, and then after 2020 we put a 1% growth rate on that 2020 number. So we used the best data that we had for what those state resources would be that we have at the moment, and then put a 1% growth factor on it. Traditionally, that's 1% growth factor is pretty much what we've used through our planning processes for STIP and TIP development. And so that sort of lines up with those exactly, those numbers line up with what was in the budget presentations. Now let's talk about each of the categories, and this is where you may want to pull your big sheet and your presentation together a little bit. The first category enumerated in the bill was construction of new highway projects. And what that consists of is you're basically what you think widening of roads from 2 to 4 lanes, or adding a center turn lane, adding passing lanes, building maybe a relocated route or a bypass route or a truck bypass, building things such as the express lanes like on on 75, I-75. So all those constructing new highways fit into that category. And so there's basically the 2 fund sources. You have the state fund sources and the federal fund sources. And when you see on the federal, you get, again, several codes there, those abbreviations. The NHPP is National Highway Priority Program. The STP is Surface Transportation. NFP is one that's exciting. It's National Freight Plan, National Freight Program. The feds still haven't made rules for that category yet, but we intend to use those. And the last, the CMAQ, is Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Projects that relate primarily to Metro Atlanta. So those are the fund sources that support those type of projects. And if you look at that, if you look over on the big sheet, you can see that the total percentage allocation for construction of new highway projects ranges from 39 to 45% over the 10 years. And when you think about that, when you think about what those represent, that represents not only construction, but it represents the design, the environmental work, the right-of-way work, and the utility work in addition to the construction. So we have to think about all the things and all the components that move that ahead. And if you think about right-of-way, that's a big number. In the Metro's area, those right-of-way costs equal or are larger than the construction cost oftentimes. Okay, so moving next to maintenance. If you look down, the next category enumerated in the bill was the maintenance of existing infrastructure, and it's exactly what you think. Capital maintenance such as resurfacing and rehabilitation, where we have to dig out a road and build a road back, and also we included the routine maintenance out there, patching potholes, filling cracks, mowing the grass, picking up litter. All those maintenance activities are included. And again, you have 2 fund sources, state and federal, and the federal has 2 subcategories to it. All right. So If you look at those percentages, it ranges from 25 to 30% range. And if you look, and you'll notice that in the first 2 years, 16 and 17, you have your highest percent allocations, and that's for a purpose. It's going to take us a little bit of time to get conditions back to a steady state, and then you can sort of reduce that capital maintenance number once you get your conditions back to where you can maintain them. So it takes a little bit of work to get over the hump initially. Next category is bridge repairs and replacements. Straight up, it's exactly what it says, beside including bridge maintenance rehabilitation in there, and maintenance, the kind of things where you have to do the maintenance on the bridges, preventative maintenance. Two fund sources again. You can see that range is between 11 and 15%. The 15% occurs in FY16, and the reason for that was that $100 million bond money that you guys were generous with last year, and we're grateful for, to advance those 25 additional bridges. So that's sort of the range of dollars you can see spread over the 10 years. The next category gets into safety enhancements, and if you flip over in your handout, this covers a broad list of project types, which are the ones you think about, like intersection improvements where you add turn lanes, or creating roundabouts, or doing innovative intersection, operational improvements, which are like adding a right turn lane or a left turn lane, quick response projects. Those are the ones I think that get a lot of traction, again, where you can just get out very quickly and add a right turn lane where you need it, and makes a real big difference in traffic as you get in, get out. Those have been state funded. Safety hardware upgrades, those are things such as guardrail upgrades. That's been a big topic in the national news over the years, and bringing our safety hardware, the signposts, the guardrails, up to standards. That's in that category. Also, TAP, which is Transportation Alternatives, which is the old T program. So the enhancement projects we put into this category as well. They have a safety benefit of wider sidewalks, all those kind of things that go along with enhancement projects. Lighting projects, and the traffic management program, which consists of our heroes. You think about the heroes, the men and women out there working hard, keeping the traffic moving. That has our signals, all the changeable signs around Metro Atlanta, all the infrastructure support, the traffic management center, and signal upgrades across the entire state, not just Metro Atlanta, but all the traffic signals, the maintenance and upgrades across the entire state. And so again, two fund sources there, state and federal. So that range, as you can see, ranges from about 7 to 10% of the allocation for the 10-year period. And one thing I say about safety, I don't want the numbers to seem low because it's safety. All the capital projects that we do, all the capital maintenance has a safety element in it. So anytime we go out and upgrade a road, we bring it up to the current standard. So you get a safety benefit. So there's a safety benefit gained out of a lot of those categories. I don't want somebody to look at safety and say, wow, that's one of your lowest categories, and aren't you guys concerned about safety? Yes, we are. Lastly is administration, and talk about that a little bit. We group the three categories of admin out of our budget, which is construction admin, which deals with everything it takes to deliver projects. That's the design, that's paying for people to review design, that's environmental, that's the right-of-way, and again, the administrative cost for the right-of-way, not the pure cost. Construction management for people to inspect the materials, go out there and manage the projects. Procurement and bidding, which is a big effort to get the projects and consultants hired, under contract, and managed, and then bid projects. Department admin includes HR and payroll, the supportive functions of the department to keep it operating. It also goes to charges that are basically in-house for department staff, but charges that it takes to administer consultant contracts as well in the consultant contracts. You can see that it grows from 8 to 9% and then maintains at 9%, which is pretty good. But understand the reason for the growth is because that we do now have a state program resulting from the Transportation Funding Act of 2015. These other charges we leverage to the federal to the maximum extent we can. If we can charge to the federal project to reduce these admin charges, but now we have to administer $800 million or more a year going forward. So we did have to grow that number a little bit. One of the last things required by the law was to talk about how through prioritization and how through efficiency we can redirect dollars, and I'll just sort of talk about that a little bit. Our current outsourced efforts in design are 70%. We outsource 70% of our work to consultants. We're probably moving to 80+% now with this additional investment. Environmental, we're already at 77% outsourced. We'll be moving to 80+ there. Right away, right now, about 40% of that's outsourced. We'll move to 50 to 55, 60% outsourced effort for people out there buying right away, actually appraising and buying right away. So I think you can see from that, we're not growing our staff. When we did our budget presentation to appropriations, our staff levels maintaining the same. I think you can see from a additional $200 million commitment to maintenance that we're not hiring any more maintenance people. We're contracting for all that, but it's going to take people to manage that. And so we're going to redeploy some of our resources and our staff and actually use consultants to help manage this additional workload. So I think you can see from trying to be efficient and trying to keep the department size where it is, we plan to shepherd this plan forward in a very efficient fashion. Turn it over to my last slide in the deck is just, again, a reminder of the website. I know there's been some bumps in the road in use of the website. One is make sure you have the latest web browser. That's important. We're continuing to tweak and perfect this to make it a little more user-friendly for everybody. It's been a great effort for transparency. We want to make sure that you and your constituents back home can go find out information and ask questions. Again, I think it's a great way to advance this in a very transparent way, and we're excited about that. But I think you can see from this plan, it's well balanced. If you go back to the press conference and you looked at those levels of investment in the categories that we've talked about of capital and maintenance and bridges, again, it fulfills the promise, in my opinion, of what the Joint Study Committee did last year when they looked at what would close to $1 billion do for this state, and that was to take care of our critical infrastructure first and foremost. And it's given us the ability to advance some of those key freight corridors, do all those basic projects that we've talked about in the STIP and the TIP that exist, and give us a little bit of a way to start moving on some of the major mobility projects in Metro Atlanta. So I feel like this is a great plan as you look at it. It's 10 years. It represents over $29 billion of investment over those 10 years, so you can average that out to about $2.9 billion a year to give you a little perspective. Again, I feel like this is a good path forward, and I'll conclude there, Mr. Chairman, and be glad to field any questions. And if they're really hard, Jay gets those.
Well, I have one request for you, and that is you mentioned the editorial that you had penned. Would you please email that to my office so we can get that out to the members as well?
Yes, sir.
Some of us may want to forward that onto our local press outlets.
I would appreciate that.
You do have a couple questions. Is it Mr. Chairman Benton? Is that? There you go. See if you're muted there. I'm not sure you're coming through. Well.
Are you 26, Mr. Benton? I
Yeah,
am. Okay.
we've got you. We've got your button pressed here, so I'm not sure what the problem would be.
Oh, there we go. There we go.
You just so soft spoken.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot about me. No, we trained Russell at Gainesville before he came down here to Atlanta. I have a question about the construction of new highway projects all the way across here. Do I see any money that's going to be allocated for three-laning I-85 out of Gwinnett County?
Yes, absolutely. That's part of our plan is to work forward, working from the south northward towards South Carolina. That was part of in the 10-year major mobility investment. That was one of the projects, actually two of the projects. The notion is to work toward up to the State Route 211 area, Chateau Alon, and then get up to Jefferson over the next. That was one of those we put in the category over the next 10 years that we would be underway with. and again, using a design build finance method, again, to try to advance these projects sooner than later. The total initiative to get to South Carolina is about $1 billion.
We're not going to have to wait 10 years to get from the start on it, are we?
No, sir.
Okay. Can I ask one other question?
Yes.
On the maintenance, is there any chance that when you let the projects on cutting the medians, you get them to pick up the trash for the bush hog?
I would hope so, but again, that's a private effort, and if you rather pick up one piece of 1,000 pieces, I don't know if I can help.
Well, it just looks better than having 1,000 pieces out there. We might even could get the work camp to go out there and help pick up a little bit. One other question, and I hear this from my biggest constituent, and that is my wife. She cannot see the lines on the highway when it's raining. Is there anything that is being done to test the paint to get a better reflection off the paint? And I know what she's talking about, but she drives in the morning at 4:30 in the morning, and it's hard to see it, especially when it's raining.
Indeed, a couple things. Let me circle back to mowing. One, litter pickup is very critical. We're actually increasing with the investment now that we have available. We're going to mow the interstates 4 times a year instead of 3. That comes with additional litter pickup as well. So we're really trying to get this litter thing under control. And on all the other state routes, we'll get mowed 3 times a year instead of 2. So you'll see as I call it, a clean and green roadway, and we got to get the litter taken care of. This investment also gives us the ability under that maintenance piece that we are now doing maintenance contracting for restriping our roads. Because the pavement conditions, and we haven't been able to keep up with resurfacing, at which time when the road got resurfaced, it got new stripes. So we fell behind over this where we didn't have the resources to get the roads resurfaced except on a 50-year cycle. Now we're going to, in between, before they get even resurfaced, you're going to see significant restriping across our state. That is a safety concern. It's not that it's the paint itself that is bad or the material that is bad. It's just flat worn out. So that is one of the categories that we have. We are outsourcing all that. We are putting out contracts now statewide to have roads restriped on a sort of on a as-needed on-call basis. So we're very excited about that because it's not only her. It's me and everybody else is having those challenges. We plan to make a big difference in that arena.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Representative Al Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Some of my economic development people mentioned today that you're about ready to let some contracts on near 1695 near the port. If you wouldn't mind expounding on that a little. And you mentioned that the misnomer about 64% of the funds going to the metro area. What is that number going to be, roughly?
All right, let me talk about 16 and 95. Obviously, I think everybody gets it that for freight mobility, that's a critical interchange. It does not function very well now. We're actually doing the preliminary design work now, try to advance that project in the next few years to be a design-build project with it has a finance piece in it. Because not only is the interchange, but would be widening another lane, the third lane, down to 516, so that freight and people, and understand when freight flows better, people flow better too, right? You get those trucks, you get trucks more places and cars more a dedicated lane, if you will. So that's one of, again, it's sort of similar to 85 is one of those that we had no ability to move forward with, but now we're moving forward with those, and they would be a design, build, and a finance piece is our strategy at the moment. So those 2 projects already that have been mentioned are a little bit on the faster pace because they're very low right-of-way impact, if any. So that's good. So from a delivery point, those you can advance it. The percent allocation, let's go back to that, okay? Let's not forget that we still have congressional balancing that applies. So over 5 years, dollars are distributed over 14 ways to cover each congressional districts. Now with the exception of interstate and freight corridors as previously voted on to move forward. So that allocation will be an equal share. What that turns out to be 1/14 all the way around. So again, that 84% discussion was based on 11 projects, not the whole universe of thousands and thousands of projects.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Representative Carson.
Commissioner, good to see you. And Jay, good to see you as well. I appreciate you putting all this together. I fully understand how long and how much attention this takes to detail. I really appreciate it. My question was in regard to the federal funding in fiscal 16 on the strategic plan. Russell, when we were talking in, I believe it was in Cherokee County, maybe a month and a half ago, 6 weeks ago, you had mentioned that the department was doing more and more to use federal money for other purposes other than capital because of the environmental restrictions, the red tape, the regulations. Can you describe how that is going, particularly in regard to almost 50% of federal funds that we're getting in are used for construction? How does that compare to, how does that compare to history? And is there any way to bring that number down so we get these projects done more quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And the example, I think probably one of the best examples is that State Route 20 corridor.
Yeah, you had mentioned that.
Where we were trying to follow that federal process that was causing us to follow crisscrossing circuitous routes to explore that came with the upset of many, many residents and schools. And so how
I'm sure you heard from a few of them.
One or two. One or two. So what this has done, and it's hard to show in these numbers, but exactly what it's done is we're now able to take where there's flexibility in those federal programs. There are some flexibility in all those 6 programs I showed you to move money around a little bit. You can slide money left or right on the ledger. So we're moving some of that over into the capital maintenance, which is hard to show here because there's really no baseline to show against, and move that into the maintenance arena, which takes less of a federal environmental process, less of the bureaucracy that you have to work through, and then take those state funds, which are generated from TFA 2015, to put toward the capital kind of projects. So it's a little hard to see here unless you really baselined it. It is a big benefit that we've never had as a state. And again, it gives us the ability to be flexible where we've never been flexible before, so that we can get that project on the ground much sooner, as the public expect it, than when you have to follow some of the federal processes. I don't want to give, I'm not here bagging on the feds, but it comes with a lot of nuances and a lot of bureaucracy. Sorry, I don't have a good percentage number there, but the thing it does have is we have flexibility to make those decisions strategically.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Right.
All right, to my fellow train conductor down here. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As a recently certified transit conductor, it would follow I might ask you about transit funding. How much does all the transit funding from, and thank you, CSX, for that tour that you provided for us. It was lots of fun, and we learned a lot. So the transit money from the federal government also comes through your department?
It depends. The city, MARTA, and a few other operators are direct recipients, so FTA money goes directly to them. We have a couple of federal programs, 5311, and a couple of other programs that go out to rural transit operators that flow through us. And again, we provide a support level service for pretty much rural transit and small transit operators.
Would you provide for me sort of an outline of what that funding is? I mean, the funding that you get related to transit?
As far as dollars, or?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, so there's different federal buckets. The buckets we've talked about here today come from surface transportation, okay, and then separate from that is transit. And so that's obviously different agency from USDOT. And so that flows through our intermodal program, which is, again, state funded out of general fund. And so that's, I can look
Which is in your department, though.
Which is in our
right?
department,
okay.
right. None of that is represented here because it's not articulated
I understand,
in the law.
yeah.
So, but those, that flows, again, the 5311 the bigger federal program, 5307, I'm sorry for all these acronyms, it covers different operating categories. And so those do come through our intermodal office. We do contracts with local governments, sign those contracts, so the flow of funds operate back and forth. We process their invoices. We provide oversight, required to provide oversight. We provide state safety oversight for MARTA and for the City of Atlanta Streetcar. That's one of our duties as well. So there's
So is
a
that
lot of,
defined in some document somewhere that you could get from me?
okay, we'll try to work
Josh is
something out.
shaking his head, so yeah. My real question had to do with the STIP, which is on your website, right?
That's correct.
I mean, I know it's hard to follow, but I think I can find what the City of Atlanta piece of that is. And together with the bonding that the City of Atlanta has and your wonderful efforts to clean up our interchanges, we should be able to see some real progress in the city with regard to potholes and maintenance of our streets. So I wanted to thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And to find for the Metro, if you go to the ARC's website for their TIP,
Yeah.
they have a good searchable database and website that you can find projects that come through the metropolitan planning organizations.
You say it's searchable, huh? I'll try.
Okay.
You good?
Yep.
All right, thank you, Representative Gardner. Representative Watson. Did you have one, Representative Watson? Oh, okay. I had your. Okay, let me get to the other committee members first. Representative Prince, did you have a question?
Afternoon, Commissioner. Jay, how you doing? That's a great job on the strategic plan, but my question goes to slide 3 when it talks about your priorities, how we prioritize the projects, I'm assuming, or how the money's spent. And I get to the maintenance and expansion and improvement piece, got it. But then when you start talking about the where piece, the areas of, they're impacted by the traffic congestion and then the need for the economic development. How does that fit for rural areas?
Well, first I'll say congestion is relative, right? Everywhere you go, there's an element of congestion. So basically, for the rural areas, first and foremost, part of that freight investment along the GRIP corridors and along those strategic corridors, that was revealed at the presentation. 49 projects over the next 10 years through rural Georgia for expansion, for capacity. I mean, that's a big investment. It completes major corridors like 441 where there's several gaps, State Route 133, US 84, State Route 17. You start thinking about all those corridors where there's bits and pieces have been improved. Right. Over the next 10 years, this plan connects the dots, if you will, to make those full corridors. That's a big investment over the next 10 years. But we don't need to forget, again, on the STIP level and from the operational safety, when you get into that safety category, sometimes congestion is simple as getting some turn lanes and a signal. And so we still foundationally have all that. So that investment still happens, just as it happens now and even enhanced. So that happens for rural Georgia as well. I think that was one of the things that was hard, obviously in a press conference and what's come out in the media, is you focused on a couple of big things. We focused on bridge categories, obviously bridges throughout this state. I mean, if you look at that map, I mean, we're touching bridges on city streets and county roads just as well as state routes. So it happens all over the state. But I just think, in sound bites and in a 5 to 10 minute press conference, you highlight certain things. But I just want this committee to understand that foundationally, we're taking care of a lot of things across this state in a better fashion than we've ever been able to do.
Well, thanks for your work and the plan. Appreciate it.
All right, we've got a few more questions. I want to try to move along a little bit more quickly if we can, because I know these guys have to get down to the Senate committee at 3, so let's keep that in mind. Representative Bryant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, my question pertains to maintenance. What's your procedure or policy pertaining to potholes, especially, and I'm referring to my area where we have heavy traffic from the ports and a lot of potholes on 516 that's been in existence for months and nothing has been done. What's the policy on repairing those potholes?
Well, first, I regret that if you've had them out there for months, I regret that, and you are in a heavy wear and tear area in your district, no doubt about it. Our policy is to get them fixed, okay? That's been a challenge, but now with this plan, again, we're putting $200 million into contract maintenance for that very reason, to repair potholes and do that basic maintenance, not all repair potholes, but so that we can actually have on-call services for people to go out, especially when you got concrete, to go out there and cut those concrete slabs out and pour them back with concrete so there's an adequate fix, and not just going out there throwing some temporary stuff in there that comes out the next time it rains. So this gives us a lot of ability to start taking care of our maintenance as we need to, not only the responsive maintenance, but preventive maintenance. So you will see a difference. This gives us the ability now to see the difference.
I'd like to add one other thing. You also, coming out of the ports, where they just finished work on 307, I think it is, good work, but you have big concrete dividers, and I'm sure it's large because of the trucks, but they're just regular gray type concrete. It will help, I think, if it was some color on these things that people like myself driving through they could see. When I make that turn, I have to be very careful to make sure I don't run up against one of those things.
Yes,
It should be some kind of color, I think, to get people attention.
okay.
And that's all I have.
Thank you.
So noted. Thank you.
Representative Hitchens.
The first thing I'd like to say is I've known both you guys for a long, long time, and you know, my district is right adjacent to Bob's, and we both together represent the majority of the Port of Savannah, and it is a high traffic volume area, and you both know that I lived here for 10 years pretty much on a permanent basis, and when I went back home I was just stunned at the congestion that in my district. We almost doubled population in the last 10 years, and we've gone from 10,000 people in the county I live in to 60,000 over the last 25 years, and we've had the same road system that's been in place for about 40 years. And most all the investment that you've made here recently that you announced the other day is in my district, where it's the #1 priority, 21 and 95, I-16, I-95, I-16 going into Savannah, the new Effingham Parkway, and I just have to tell you, everybody in our area, I got to go speak to the Savannah delegation in just a minute, and they're all very enthused. They voted against T-Splosh because they didn't believe that we would follow through and get things done, and they see this now, and they're very happy, and all your past transgressions are forgiven.
Wow. Let that reflect in the record, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you speaking as a law enforcement officer? Or,
He might have been referring to me instead.
Thank you.
Madam Vice Chair.
Mr. Commissioner, and thank you so much for what you've done with this. I just wondered, I'm trying to spend some more of your money, actually. Wondered if you received this research from our Athens folks, Regina Quick, Spencer Fry, and I just saw Representative Quick walk in, and it has to do with limited access in 316, and just for your burner, just if you could consider this also. It's such a dangerous highway right now, getting from all over Georgia to Athens.
Okay. I have not seen that. I'd be glad to look at it. And again, when we put the plan out, there are projects on 316 to build interchanges. I think to get all 40, I think there's like 40 projects. It's about $400 million range to do all 40 projects that we have. But over the 10 years, there are projects already underway. We'll be able to share that. I'll be glad to look at that.
Thank you.
And as somebody that actually worked physically to build 316, I have a real appreciation for it.
And thank you for your usual excellent work, all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Okay. Are there any other members that have questions? If not, I'm going to recognize a representative who is not a member of this committee, Representative Chuck Williams, who has asked if he could ask a couple questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question, Commissioner. Thank you. On this issue of bridge repairs and replacements, we talked a lot about that last year when we were discussing HB 170. Can you talk about, over this 10-year span, this level of funding and sort of what the timeline is as far as the approach will be taken to reducing or eliminating that backlog of deficient bridges?
Absolutely. Thank you, Representative Williams. Georgia's got almost 15,000 bridges. 11% on the state system are structurally deficient or functionally obsolete. Structurally deficient is what it sounds like. It is not strong enough to carry the legal load, and functionally obsolete is like your computer. You buy a computer today and next year it's obsolete. That means they don't conform to the existing design standards. But on the local systems, 18%. That's the real issue. On the city streets and county bridges, 18% of those are structurally deficient or functionally obsolete. So those are that's what we're going to be taking on because we have to keep all our bridges, number one, structurally sound, which relates to safety, which relates to moving commerce throughout this state. So this level of investment now, we're actually tripling the level of investment in how we've been able to replace bridges. And so just think about that. We need it. Actually, you'd have to do a little bit more, but we'd like to get bridges that on their 75th birthday, we get a new bridge because most of them are designed for 50 years. So we're trying to get to that stage, and this helps us drive that way very quickly. But I want you to know it is a comprehensive approach. In fact, we have right now on the street for advertisement is 5 bundles of projects that are local road projects to be design build, where you can go into the county or the city, close the street, take the bridge out, and put it back. We're doing that through innovation using design build contracts so that the contractor and the designer can roll their sleeves up, get a quick win, if you will, can start getting construction underway while design is advancing. So we're underway now to do that. But it's really a threefold increase from what we have been able to do. And again, we're very thankful for the $100 million last year in bonds, and for the notion that this year is proposed $100 million. Again, that'll get 20 to 30 additional bridges to construction. But what it does is when you move that forward, you're able to advance the pipeline of design much quicker. And I think we did for the $100 million of bonds, Jay, I think we advanced another 25 of bridges into design immediately. And so you have to keep the pipeline flowing. So we're very excited about that.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? If there are no other questions, then we'll need a motion to approve the plan as presented and forward that plan as a recommendation to the Appropriations Committee. Is there a motion? There's a motion by Mr. Epps and a second by Ms. Jones. And is there any further discussion of the motion? All in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. All opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Meeting adjourned.